Milo, is that you?
There, I think I got it. Mike?
Hello.
Mike?
Hello.
Are you there?
I'm here.
Are you there?
I'm here.
Mike, the spoon oyster tag. I like it the spoon rather than just spoon.
Yeah.
I like the spoon. You know, with quotation marks. You know, I can see that on a T-shirt. The in lowercase and then spoon with a capital.
Yeah, it sounds like I like that too.
Yeah, that just sings. That just that describes everything we need to know.
Yeah.
Mike, the spoon oyster tag from Green Bay, Wisconsin, home of the frozen tundra of Lambeau Field. All right.
You betcha.
All right, so I was on a podcast. It was a podcast review show. And
yes.
They listened to our podcast, and Dave and Eric kept insisting that the one thing I was doing wrong the most was I wasn't introducing the show and what it was about, because the episode they listened to, they were like 10 minutes in before anybody talked about trains. And I'm like, well, that's the show.
Yeah. Did they listen to any of the other episodes?
I think they kicked around and listened to some of the other ones. So, okay. Oh. So this is a Modeler's Life. This is a podcast. It's called The Modeler's Life. It's primarily about model railroading, but we talk about everything and everybody in this podcast because we love to find out about the people behind the model railroading. Would that be a fair statement?
I think that is a very good statement.
All right. Well, tonight's
like a mission statement.
Yeah, it's like a mission statement.
Yeah.
So I'm Lionel. You're Mike. We've introduced ourselves.
Yes.
We've told everybody what it is we're doing. And if Dave and Eric listen to it again, well, that'll have to be good enough.
Yeah.
What did you do today, Mike?
Well, I did a lot of running around.
Oh, yeah, you were behind. You were behind all day.
I'm behind on everything. I was at a card tournament for a little bit this afternoon, and came in fourth place, which was $120. So I guess that's a good thing.
What kind of cards?
31.
What's 31?
You get 3 cards, and your goal is to get as close to 31, all of the same suit.
Oh, okay.
There's some other. That's a layman's thing, but there's like all sorts of different rules and other things that you can do. But it's a lot of fun.
Was this a couples thing, or was this at your local union shop?
This was at one of my local watering hole establishments.
Oh, okay. Oh, so
they have them like every other week or something like that.
Oh, okay. So occasionally you tip one back, do you?
Yeah, one, just one.
All right, let's stop talking because we're not that interesting.
Okay.
Tonight this is gonna be really interesting. Or today, if you're listening to it on your drive into Philadelphia, or tonight if you're listening to it as you drive north towards Fairbanks, Alaska, or today if you're on the treadmill, or whatever you're doing, wherever you are in the world. If you're Martin Jenkins and you're listening to it, wherever you are, Martin Jenkins is in Australia. What's that noise? Whoever did that, stop it. You're annoying me. Martin Jenkins is on the Gold Coast in Australia. Where the Sharks are. All right. Okay, so we're going to talk to a fellow named Robert Frascella. Am I saying it right? Is it Robert?
Yes. But you can call me Bob.
Yeah, we're not talking to you yet. Go back into the green room.
Oh, sorry.
This is awesome.
Apparently he's never been introduced before.
Well, you know what? Everybody's new at something.
At one. Yeah, this is his first time on the big stage.
Yeah. There's probably some jitters. Rightfully so, though. I mean, it is a very nerve-wracking experience.
Is it? Well,
it can be.
Okay, that makes me feel good. You're not nervous, are you? You're an old hand at this now.
I'm not nervous at all.
That's good. Well, then, can you go into the green room and get Robert, bring him into the studio for us?
Sure. Hold on a minute.
All right.
Hey, Robert.
Oh,
Now you can come. You can come out now.
Yeah.
Now you can come out. Okay, but don't leave the shrimp back there.
Yeah.
There's no chewing. There's no chewing shrimp while on air.
Yeah, exactly. No shrimp while, and be careful where you sit. When you sit down on the couch, be careful at the one end there. Something happened to it, and somebody McGurked on it. We're not sure. We don't know how.
man.
Yeah, we don't know. It's bubbling. It's been bubbling for a while now, so we don't really. We suggest you stay away from that end.
Never has really dried out.
No, it never dried out. That's the problem. It never dried out.
I think I would rather step in a cat hairball with bare feet rather than sit on that end of the couch.
So, Robert, you and Mike are acquaintances.
Yes, we are. Definitely.
I apologize for that.
Me too.
Yeah, exactly. How does my mic sound? Do I sound good?
You sound great.
Okay, so do you. So Robert, you live near Boston, do you not?
Yes, I live in Wenham, Massachusetts.
How do you say
And
it?
that's Wenham. Wenham.
Okay.
Wenham.
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 And where exactly is that in relation to Boston, Massachusetts?
It's about 25 miles north of Boston.
Okay, so it's probably a fairly populated suburb, is it?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that.
You wouldn't?
No, I wouldn't.
Oh, okay. I would have thought.
Maybe 3,000 people.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. So it's not that popular, but okay. I would have thought pretty much Boston's a big city.
Oh, it is. It is.
Are you a native Massachusettsite?
No, I'm not. No, I'm actually I'm a native of New Jersey.
Okay.
But I left there a long time ago.
Are you a Boston Bruins fan?
Not particularly.
Oh, okay, this is going to go pretty well then, I think.
He's off to a roaring start.
Yeah, this is going to go well.
We could be done in 10 minutes at this rate.
Yeah, exactly. We would have been done in 10 minutes if he was a Boston Bruins fan.
Oh yeah.
So how did you and Mike meet?
Well, it's interesting. We met online.
Okay, hang on before you go on. Okay. Usually the way the show works is me and Mike will decide if it's interesting or not. You tell the story.
Okay.
And then we'll determine whether or not it's interesting.
Okay. Well.
Yeah.
All right. So I began developing some 3D designs in S-Scale, and I was posting them to the S-Scale Model Railroad Facebook page. And Mike would comment and respond and said, "Wow, that's really neat," and expressed an interest in some of the things I was designing. So it turned out, after communicating with Mike through Facebook Messenger, that he's a locomotive engineer for the CN, and I was trying to design some parts that were basically second generation diesel parts. And Mike said, "Well, if you need some help, let me know." And I said, "Well, that's great. I could use some dimensions." So Mike could go to work and measure some locomotive parts for me and do a little sketch, and then he would photograph it and send it back to me, and I would use that in designing the 3D parts.
Okay. And you guys discovered you two were the only two on the S-Scale page?
Yeah, right.
With vision.
Yeah. Yeah. So how long?
We're up to about 3 now. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the page called? It's a Facebook page, or?
Yes, it's the S-Scale Model Railroading Facebook page.
And how many members would that page have?
Oh boy.
Isn't it's about 400 or so?
I've got it right here.
All right, go.
971.
Oh man.
971. So if we can pick you guys up another 29 people tonight, you'll be over 1,000.
We could hire somebody to do our work for us.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So that's pretty cool. So there's 907, and that's worldwide, I guess. And you guys have probably hooked up with people all around the world, eh?
That's correct.
And how long did this? How long has it been since romance has been going on?
It's been going on 3 years now, Mike?
Oh, pretty close to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something like that. Yeah. Seems like yesterday, to be honest with you. It doesn't seem like it's been that long. It seems like we've been friends forever.
Yeah.
Well, how long has it been since you and I stumbled onto each other, Mike?
I want to say it's got to be pretty close to just a hair over a year.
Yeah, it seems
I think I think I had my interview in February or something like that of last year.
right. It seems like about 20 to me.
That's your fault.
I apologize. That was rude, and I apologize. That
That was funny, and don't bother.
So, Robert, have you been a model railroader all your life?
Oh, yeah. Since I was 3 years old when my dad or my folks got me my first American Flyer train set, and, under the Christmas tree. And then my dad said, well, it needs to be more than just at Christmas time. So he built a little S-gauge layout using the Flyer system in our basement. And I've always been in S-scale.
Wow.
Yeah. So started out with American Flyer, and back in the 70s, I saw a bunch of photos where guys were converting American Flyer to scale using scale wheel sets and DC motors and things like that. And I said, well, sounds really cool. I think I'll give it a try. And so I did. And back then, if you were in S-scale, that's about the only avenue you had to developing a scale model was to take a Flyer model and convert it to scale.
Wow, so you're a lifelong S-scaler.
Yes, I am.
Wow, that's kind of cool, eh, Mike? I guess when you found that out, that was pretty cool.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's not many, that's for sure.
Wow. All right. So so all through your, here's the thing I think there's, everybody's always hand-wringing about, oh my goodness, the hobby's dying and this and that and the next thing. Well, first off, I think the internet's making it grow like crazy. And secondly, they always say we got to get young people in the hobby, and everybody I've interviewed, except for like two, has been a lifelong model railroader. I think it's something that when you get hooked on it, you're there forever.
I would agree.
And I think the same process is continuing on. I don't think the chain has ever been broken. I don't think it'll be broken now. I think the same process will carry on, and more young people will find it because it's available on the internet.
Absolutely.
Okay, so all right, so you're a model railroader all through school, and were you fairly active in high school, or did you take a break in your late teens and early 20s for girls and cars, or?
Yeah, probably in high school and early college years. It
Yeah.
wasn't girls and cars, maybe girls and rock and roll, but I was never into cars much. But
Okay, and when you got a girl and you were going to the rock and roll show, how did you get there?
usually with a car.
There you go. Attaboy.
Yes.
So are you going to be a problem pretty much the whole interview, or are you going to be able to straighten yourself out before we get to the end?
I'll try my best.
All right. So rock and roll. Do you mind if I ask you how old of a gentleman you are?
I'm 67.
Okay. So rock and roll. So early days of rock and roll, the 60s and all that stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So did you play an instrument or something? You seemed like music was a big deal for you.
Well, I tried to play a musical instrument, but I played guitar a little bit, and bass guitar.
Right.
Was in a band, but was never really good at it. So
What was the band called?
I don't even remember. A no-name band. But,
All right. Did you have long hair and the whole thing? Like, were you really scruffy and it was driving your parents nuts?
Oh, of course.
Attaboy.
Of course.
All right. So then, did you go to college or university, or
Yes, I
did
went.
you flunk out of high school, or?
No, I went to college. Spent 4 years in college studying civil engineering.
Okay.
Um, Graduated. I wanted to be a highway engineer, designed highways, but um, when I graduated in 1973, most of the interstate highway system in the United States was already designed, so there wasn't a lot of jobs for highway engineers. So I took a job in St. Louis working for a consulting engineering firm, and that was interesting because when you work for a consulting firm, every assignment is different. Depends on what the job is and where they need you, and so you learn a variety of different things.
Okay. And just before we go on, because we want everybody to have the best listening pleasure of all. Have you got the mic? Is the microphone in line in your headphones? Is that how it's working, or?
Yes.
Because I can hear it kind of, we can hear it kind of scratching like you're not allowed to move. You have to sit perfectly still.
Oh, okay.
Problem with it, you got to be careful not to touch the wire because every time you do, it makes kind of a scratching sound, and I got a feeling
Uh-huh.
this will be interesting, and we don't want people to be getting annoyed as much as possible. If we
So
can avoid it.
wrapping the wire around my finger is not a good thing.
Probably not. That's probably what's doing it.
I'll cease and desist.
Yeah, wrapping mic around your finger, that's okay, but not the wire. So where did you go to college?
University of Dayton, Dayton, Ohio.
Well, how did you end up in Dayton, Ohio from New Jersey?
That's an interesting story because
Again, hang on. We're Mike and
Didn't
I.
he understand the first part?
I don't think he did. We'll just have to remind him. Again, Mike and I will decide if it's interesting.
oh.
Hey, Lionel,
Yeah?
I just want you to know I did hear you say that the first time.
Okay, good. All right. So my mic is working.
Yeah, your mic's working.
All right.
Okay. I won't worth it. I won't digress.
Okay. So how did you end up in Dayton?
So after I spent 2 years in junior college in New Jersey and decided, well, I think I'll get my 4-year degree. And at that time, I was living at home. And at 20 years old, I wanted to experience more than living in my parents' home. So I decided, well, I'm going to transfer to a school that's about as far away as I can get that would take more than a day's drive for my folks to get there. So,
And you wanted to go someplace romantic and exciting.
yeah, well, that wasn't Dayton, Ohio. But
Yeah, I was going to say that was going to kind of be my next question.
yeah.
How did Dayton end up on the short list?
Well, there was a list of schools that the junior college provided that would accept the most amount of credits. So Dayton was one of those, and I chose that because I wouldn't have to lose any credits or take additional courses when I got there.
Okay, and do you remember much about the school?
Yeah, a little bit.
What was the school? What was the school called? Like, was it Dayton Community College? Was it Dayton University?
No, it was the University of Dayton.
The University of Dayton, and their mascot was
The Flyers.
the Flyers.
The Dayton Flyers.
So
yes.
you're sure you weren't in Philadelphia,
Nope.
home of the Flyers, the Broad Street Bullies?
No. Well, do you know why it's called the Flyers?
No, I'm looking forward to that. Why is that?
Because Dayton was the home of the Wright brothers, the birthplace of the Wright brothers.
Ah, okay. And so when they were playing football or whatever, they had a guy, some mascot, some guy in like a biplane suit running around the field.
Yeah, something like that. Aviator's cap.
There you go. Exactly. And it turned out years later, you'd find out it was also Mike Ostertag.
Yeah. Could have been.
All right. So now you go to Dayton and you finish your education. And then from there, you go to St. Louis.
Yes. And I go to work for a consulting engineering firm. And it was a small firm. And their civil engineering department consisted of me and one other guy, that guy being my boss. And so we would get involved in a variety of types of things. And one of our clients was a company called American Car and Foundry, and that's a company that manufactures freight cars, as you probably know.
Right. Yeah.
And we were involved in their plant modernizations in various locations. They had plants in St. Charles, Missouri, and Huntington, West Virginia, and Milton, Pennsylvania, where they made various types of rail cars. And so my job was to do the civil part of any plant expansion they had, and typically it involved relocating railroad tracks.
Oh yeah.
And so that's where I learned how to design tracks. I remember the Huntington project. They were deeply into building ACF center flow cars at the time. They were mass producing these, and the plant needed to be expanded. And the plant expansion required for them to relocate the railroad yard where the cars would be stored after they've been manufactured awaiting pickups. So,
Right.
So my boss said to me, well, why don't you figure out how to do this? I mean, no one in the company knew how to design tracks or anything. And he says, here's a manual from the American Railway Engineering Association. Why don't you figure it out? So I did. And
so how big was this firm, this engineering firm?
It was a relatively small firm. I think we had about 75 people.
Okay, so it must have had some sort of reputable reputation for a company the size of what's it called again?
Of American Car and Foundry.
Yeah, it must have had some sort of fairly valuable reputation for American Car and Foundry too.
Yes, the engineering firm's specialty was manufacturing plants. They did a lot of buildings for industrial companies, and American Car and Foundry selected them as their designers. So we had various other firms, large companies that we did process engineering and plant expansions for. One of our big clients was at the time Anheuser-Busch.
Okay.
And we did plant expansions for them, and always involved some kind of railroad relocation. And Anheuser-Busch owned their own railroad in St. Louis, and Manufacturers Railway was a wholly owned subsidiary of Anheuser-Busch. So we ended up doing work for them as well. And that's how I learned track design and railroad design.
Okay, so, and how old would you be when all this was taking place?
Probably in my late 20s, early 30s.
Okay, and how long did you stay? So, by the time you were in your late 20s, you were planning railroad yards for Anheuser-Busch.
Yes.
That seems like quite the job. And you learned all this from a manual, basically.
Yeah, right. It was.
And did you ever let on that you never knew what you were doing, or? Because at the start you couldn't have really known what the heck you were doing.
No. Well, it's not difficult to design sidings and yard trackage, but mainline track, that's a whole different story.
Why is mainline track more difficult to design than sidings?
Because you're designing track that's super elevated, has to be designed to carry trains at speed, at much heavier weights. So it's much more complicated.
Well, can you give us a hint of why it's more complicated? Because it sounds to me like it's just on the top of a pile of gravel and it has to be straight. Well, I mean, for the layman, the guys, the model railroad guys, you're saying that sidings are easier to design than main lines, and I can see that off at first glance because sidings, it's low speed, so I mean you basically just have to make sure there's not a 90-degree bend in it and things like that,
and that clearances are adequate, and that there's adequate cover over culverts and pipelines, things like that. So there's a lot There's a lot that goes into designing track other than just laying it on gravel or ballast, whatever you want to call it.
Right. So then you take that same process and you apply it to mainline trackage, and it's harder how?
It's harder because the loads are greater, because the speeds are higher. So the track has to be designed to carry whatever. For example, if you're designing track that's going to be carrying trains at 79 miles an hour, there's a lot to be considered other than just the super elevation and the speed, the soil characteristics. Is the soil underneath going to support the train? So it becomes very complicated.
All right, and so is that a whole different guy, or I mean, it sounds like you know what you were supposed to do. Does the railroad have a whole team of engineers that do that for them?
Yes, they do. Most railroads have their own engineering department, and how much of that they design themselves is, I guess, dependent on how big the project is. If the project's big and complicated, usually they'll go out to a consulting engineering firm who will do the design plans and specifications for them.
Okay, so like when you talk about weight, I mean, it seems to me that every car is only on the track at one time. So what difference does it make if it's a 100-car train or a 3-car train as far as weight goes? Because the weight is dispersed across the track. So at that particular spot, the weight is the same whether it's mainline or siding, is it not?
Yeah, but the geometry of the track is different. So, for example, curvature is a factor. The speed of the track is a factor because then you have to super elevate the curves. You have to have spirals that lead into them.
Spirals? Like you have to go, like a slinky spiral?
Well, in model railroad term, I think we call it an easement. Basically, when you go from tangent track into curved track, you don't just begin the curve. You ease into the curve by what's in real railroads. It's known as a spiral. Basically, it's a
okay. So all right, and
it's a transition from tangent track to circular curves.
And tangent stands for straight. I didn't know that tangent stood for straight for quite some time. So the best way for us to conduct this interview, and it's really not that far off from the truth, and I think Mike will back me up on this, is if you just think of me as your dim-witted brother. When I'm asking you questions, it'll make a lot more sense to you.
Okay.
Oh, that's my dim-witted brother, so that's why I got to explain it to him. So, okay, I'm still stuck on the weight. Mike, do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, absolutely. And I understand exactly what Robert's saying also. Because, as someone who has dealt with what Robert does, I'm going to try to do this as simply as possible for everybody to understand. If you're going down a piece of straight main line, the railroad doesn't own all the property around it. The railroad has to go where the railroad owns the property.
Right.
Okay. Which lends itself to certain geographical changes that need to be made. So, i.e. curves, things of that nature. And sometimes the easiest way would have been to just go straight. But they might have to have an S curve in order to continue to go straight.
Right.
Well, when you're going, I'm just going to use 60 miles an hour, and you're coming into like a spiral into a curve. The high side of the curve needs to be elevated.
Right.
In order to allow the speed of that train to not go straight. Because once a unit of motion wants to stay in motion going in the direction that it's going. So you want it to go straight. The unit wants to go straight. basically, I'm sorry, Robert, if I'm stepping on your toes. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, go
on
right ahead.
this. So what you do is you elevate the high side of the curve to force that straight to navigate around where you want it to go.
Right.
And so you're dealing with centrifugal force. And it gets really kind of tricky because, like with an S curve, and Robert, again, correct me if I'm wrong, you have multiple transitions that have to happen in order to get around a decent S curve at 60 miles an hour. That is an extremely complicated piece of engineering that people just don't understand, because you're actually transitioning from a high side into the low side, and the low side becomes the high side all within a very short period of time. And trains are top heavy. They want to tip over. I mean, we've covered this quite a few times in the past, but just for everybody listening at home, if it's your first time, welcome. All the cars are on a just sitting on a bolster, and they're just basically held in there with a pin. So you want to make sure that you can have this as smooth as possible transition, and it's extremely scientific.
Sure.
And it when I'm out there running a train, like Robert said before, the track geometry, I might be in what they call a swell. At least that's what we call it around here, a swell or a sway back or whatever you want to call it, where I'm coming downhill to a low point, and then I'm going to be pulling back uphill. Well, in the middle of doing all that, I might have an S curve involved in that. So while I'm a mile away from the rear of my train, you need to be able to operate the train to safely make sure that the rear portion of that train gets through that S curve at speed without any kind of undue forces that could create it to separate or derail or stuff like that. It becomes very, very complicated. There's all like mathematical equations that they actually teach us how to determine the speed of your train at the head end, compare it to the hind end, depending on grade and all this. It really can get complicated. So what Robert's designing is pretty crucial stuff,
Yeah.
because if it weren't for guys, here's a shameless plug for you, Robert. If it weren't guys that knew what they were doing like Robert does, you'd hear about derailments. The trains would probably go 10 miles an hour, 20 miles an hour throughout the United States. You wouldn't have high-speed track.
Sure.
But yet 10-mile-an-hour track.
So the weight of the train has got a lot to do with the speed then.
It has a lot to do with the speed. It has, because you push a bowling ball, a 12-pound or a 15-pound bowling ball down a hill, and you push a, ping pong ball down that same hill, that bowling ball, because it has more weight and force behind it, it's going to go much faster. And a ping pong ball will eventually catch up to it, but it's going to take a lot longer for it to do that.
Yes, I guess.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess the answer to my question is the difference between designing mainline track and sidings is that mainline track, there's a lot of speed involved, so therefore the calculations and the computations become much more critical and difficult.
Exactly, especially on curves. And the transition from tangent into the curve.
Right. Whereas any industrial siding, basically, the train's operating at 5 or 10 miles an hour, so there's really no consideration for, super elevation or anything like that.
That's correct. That's correct.
So
ideally, when you're designing a curve based on a certain speed, you design that curve so that there's not too much weight on the low rail. So, for example, if it's a 40-mile-an-hour curve and a train's going around it at 10 miles an hour, all that weight is going to be on the low rail in that super elevated curve. So you try to design that to have some kind of equilibrium, because if you're going too fast around the curve, all the weight's going to be on the outside rail.
Right. Yeah, that all makes sense. So I guess my question would be, you never ended up, is it more schooling? Like, do you have to have more schooling to end up, like, it just was the way you said, I never designed mainline track, and I'm thinking, so is that like the guy's got to have another degree? He's got to be a smarter engineer? Like, why? Or is it just like a group of guys, or it's just like it's so...
It's more on the job training and working with railroads and working with railroad engineers who've learned it the hard way. Back in the 70s when I was in school, they didn't teach railroad engineering in college.
Okay, so it's just a simple matter of which direction did your career go.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Exactly.
See, that's, and then it was not. Now, don't you feel better? You feel like you've done a lot of explaining, but in the back of your mind, you're thinking to yourself, well, this guy's just my dim-witted brother anyway, so I understand why he's asking all these questions.
No, not at all.
Well, you ought to try it. You'll be a lot happier.
I can see Tom Jacobs starting to tear his main line track out now and saying, doggone it, now I got to recalculate all of this stuff.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and James Mattern is going, oh, my...
James Mattern.
Yeah, he's going, oh, my God, I just laid all this stuff. We got to start again? and neither one of them have been able to get the dime off their forehead.
No.
Okay, so how long... So was that... Did that become your career then, designing rail yards?
Yeah, probably for the first 10 or 15 years of my career. And then in about 1985, I moved to upstate New York and got into more engineering management and managed a small consulting firm in the Finger Lakes area.
Okay, so whereabouts in the Finger Lakes area did you live?
Near Elmira, New York.
I know where that is.
Yeah.
Near Corning.
Yes, near Corning.
Okay, so now, so you did for the first 15 years your engineering, you were actually designing rail yards. Were there other rail yards besides Anheuser-Busch that we would know of, or that were impressive, or, well, they're all impressive, but yeah, like, I mean, what other rail yards would you have designed that we might be interested in?
I did some track work for the Morrison Knudsen Company, who did railcar manufacturing and rebuilding in Hornell, New York.
Okay.
Back in the 80s.
Morrison Knudsen.
Yes.
We talked to another fellow about Morrison Knudsen a long time ago. Weren't you telling me about some hump yard or something that he designed?
Well, it was the part of the Coors Brewery. He was part of the team for the Coors Brewery redesign.
Okay.
Which was actually very interesting when I found out about it.
I thought you had told me he designed some other yard. There was some other yard that he had designed.
Oh, yeah. You're the Robert, tell a story behind the auto train yard.
Try to stay with me, guys. Will you? This is let me describe how the podcast works. This is a podcast about railroading and trains. So, like, I ask questions, and then, like, I might already know about this stuff, but, I kind of lead the person towards it, and then they go, well, I did design an auto train yard, and trust me, there's a lot of people out there that would like to know about that, and they don't want to hear the pain of me trying to get you to tell me. What year was it that you designed the auto train yard?
1996.
So then did you get back into it? Because in 85 you were
living
in Elmira.
The chronology goes, I spent 8 years in the Elmira area.
Right.
In 1993, I took a job with a very large engineering firm in the Boston area.
Okay.
And they hired me to manage a very large commuter rail project. It was known as the Old Colony Commuter Rail Project, and it provided commuter rail service to all of southeastern Massachusetts.
Wow!
And it was a huge project. It was 60 some miles of track, 21 commuter rail stations, basically took underutilized or abandoned railroad rights of way and built 79 mile an hour track for commuter rail service into Boston.
Wow.
So
okay, now you just got finished telling
dozens of bridges.
you just got finished telling me you couldn't design 79 mile an hour track, and now you're telling me you're designing 79 mile an hour track.
Well, it was much later in my career, so this would have been with 25, 30 years experience. So
okay.
by
And
three.
Mike,
Yes.
is this guy being a smart ass or is it just he just wants me to drag it out of him?
I think he's just playing the game.
Oh, okay. Attaboy.
Yeah.
So then you did know how to. So eventually
Oh, yeah.
you learned how to do high speed track,
High speed track, yes.
and that would be done with a team of engineers.
With a team of engineers. At one point, I had 75 engineers working for me on this project as we rebuilt bridges, and there was even a tunnel on this project. So it was a very comprehensive project. It had layover yards where trains would lay over when they're not
Right.
needed for commuting purposes,
Right.
and some major bridges, even a major river crossing. So it was quite a project.
Okay. I think I've been on the major river a couple of times. So how do you supervise 75 engineers trying to design a railroad?
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of plan review and a lot of meetings and talking about what's going on and meeting deadlines and reviewing specifications. It was mind-boggling.
Yeah, it sounds. And how many years did that take?
Took 4 years from 73 to 93 to 97.
Okay, so not it didn't. I mean, 4 years sounds like a long time, but it's not really that long for such a massive job.
Yes,
So
that's true.
So it's so that you designed the commuter rail system. What's a commuter rail system called that you designed the track for?
Well, it's the MBTA, the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority's Old Colony project, and
Okay.
there were 3 lines that radiated out of Boston. One went from Boston to Middleborough, one went from Boston to Plymouth, and the third one went to Scituate, Massachusetts.
Scituate.
Scituate.
Scituate. Who? That's what Wayne Mollahan's always talking about. Is Scituate. Isn't that he lives near Scituate or something? Is that near Rhode Island?
I wouldn't say it's near Rhode Island.
I've heard him say the word Scituate, and I can't say it. So tell me again what it was called, because you said the initials really fast, and then you said the name, and I was still stuck back at the initials. You know, that's the problem. That's not the problem. I mean, that's the same thing everybody does. I mean, when you do something for a living, it's easy to forget that the people that don't do it don't understand what you're saying. The best example I ever heard of that was when about hockey coaches, guys that are superstars in hockey, or people that are guys that are really good in hockey. The top 10% of hockey players, or 20% of hockey players, make lousy coaches because they can't understand why the other guys can't do what they can do. And it's the same thing. If you're an engineer and you're running 75 guys building a railroad line, it's kind of like, trying to explain it down to your dim-witted brother speed is hard. So what was it called again? What are the initials?
It's the MBTA, and that stands for the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority.
Okay, the best part of having this podcast is the absolute best part of having this podcast is people all over the world are listening to it. So now they're getting, okay, the MBTA, Massachusetts Bay Transit Authority. No,
Transportation
Authority. Massachusetts Bay?
Yes.
Is there a bay called the Massachusetts Bay?
Well, yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't. Do you think I have a big expansive place on the water or something? Do you know where okay, smart guy. Do you know where Lake Simcoe is?
No.
Do you know where Kempenfelt Bay is?
No.
Well, it's a huge lake in the north of Toronto. It's 30 miles long and 25 miles wide, and it's where I live. So there you go.
Sounds cool.
Here we go.
Mike, it sounds like a road trip.
Yeah, so I don't know that there's a Massachusetts Bay.
Yes, very big.
So is that where is that? Did you stay at that job, or did you move on to something else after you finished that place, or what?
Well,
like you've had a life in railroading, basically.
Yeah. Well, after that, Mike mentioned the auto train project, and that was interesting because Amtrak hired my firm to solve a problem they had in their Lorton terminal. And the problem that Amtrak had is that auto train is the world's largest passenger train. It's over 3/4 of a mile long with something like 18 passenger cars and 30 auto carrying cars.
Okay.
The problem at Lorton was that the entire train couldn't fit in the terminal.
All right.
So when they made up a train, for example, to head south, they would have to pull the entire consist out onto the main line and couple onto the auto carrying cars.
Okay.
And, CSX double track main line, 50 to 60 trains a day.
They'd have to bring everything to a halt to get this train all made up and ready to go.
Exactly. Couple everything together, tie together the airlines, do a brake test, and head south. Sometimes that could take over a half an hour.
All right.
And
hang on before you go on, Mike. Do you know what a brake test is?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Thank God you're a locomotive engineer.
Yeah, I've heard of those. Yes.
Oh, okay. All right.
So CSX trains are waiting to get through the area. Virginia Railway Express also uses those tracks. It would be a real bottleneck. And the same thing happened in reverse. When the train arrives at Lorton, it would have to hang out on the main line until they got a yard engine to pull the auto carriers off the back of the train. It was a nightmare, and it happened every day.
Yeah.
And so Amtrak thought, well, maybe we'll just move out of Lorton and find a new facility. So they hired a firm, a real estate development firm, to find them a new site. Now, keep in mind that the site has to be next to a railroad track and has to be able to accommodate a train that's 3/4 of a mile long.
Mm-hmm.
And couple that with the price of real estate in the metropolitan DC area, and you have a big problem trying to find a location to move auto train to. And so finally, after looking at various sites, we were part of the team to help evaluate sites and make sure they would work from an engineering standpoint. And finally, I was in a meeting with the facility manager, and I said, well, why don't you just extend the main line track, move the switch down 3/4 of a mile, and stay where you are? It's going to save you a heck of a lot of money, and maybe that'll work.
Right.
So he said, well, what we have to do is we have to, right outside the facility where the switch went into the CSX main line was a bridge.
Okay.
Over a local road there. And I said, well, okay, so you're looking at the cost of building a new bridge, building a triple track bridge where there's a 2-track bridge, and then acquiring some additional right of way for another half a mile past the bridge. Well, it turned out that the county who owned the road was going to replace the bridge anyway because they needed to widen the bridge from 2 lanes to 4 lanes.
Right.
And so there was some cost sharing there with Amtrak and CSX. So problem solved. Move the switch down 3/4 of a mile, and at the same time rebuilt the the facility with more modern auto loaders, and that's the story. It works. It's been working well ever since. In fact, I took the auto train there through that terminal last week and couldn't have worked better.
Okay, so I got two thoughts here, two comments, two thoughts. And see if I'm way off on this or not.
All right.
All right. So my first thought is, they hire you guys to figure out how to fix this auto train. You stall them for a couple of months, looking around the area, trying to find land, and then you go back and say, well, if you just move the switch 3/4 of a mile down the road, you could just use it right here. And they go, oh, really? And then you go, yeah, that's $2.5 million. Thanks very much.
That's the way I heard it.
You guys probably just hung. When you guys were looking for land, you probably just went to the local Wendy's and had a had a burger and killed some time and went, okay, we can go back to the office now. Just hang on a couple months and we'll tell them to move the switch.
Now you've divulged the secret of our industry.
Yeah, exactly. And the other is, do you know where the southern terminus of the auto train is?
Yes, in Sanford.
Sanford. And do you know anybody that might own a house in Florida that can actually ride his bicycle, not his motorcycle, his bicycle to the main line where that auto train goes by?
Would that be Lionel Strang?
That would be me. I can actually, that track is maybe by bicycle, maybe a mile from my house.
Really?
Yep. And I hear the train go by my house in the north is right near the CP, the Canadian Pacific Main Line. And my house in the south is about the same distance from the Amtrak or the CSX line down there. And I hear the auto train go by all the time. And occasionally I'll ride my bicycle out there and watch it go by. And they just they put in a local commuter train service down there called Sunrail.
Sunrail, yeah.
And they work all around that. So it's a pretty cool yard, not far from my house.
Yes, Rand Yard, I believe it's called.
Yeah, exactly. There's not a ton of activity, but the activity that comes out of there is steady.
Yes.
And occasionally, if you're going if it's the middle of July and you're on your motorcycle and you happen to come to the crossing just as the auto train's pulling out, it can get a little toasty standing there waiting.
Yeah, I bet.
So that's pretty. Go ahead.
Yeah. There was also a plan at one time to move the Sanford auto train terminal into Rand Yard.
Okay.
So we developed plans for that, but Amtrak, I guess, didn't have the money or desire to pursue that.
So you did that
and then
too.
Sunrail came along and occupied a large part of the yard as well. So
they just used the same terminal they've used. Must have been using that for years now at the south end.
Yeah, and the south end doesn't work as well, as efficiently as the north end.
No. Well, isn't that kind of the end of the line there? No, I guess not really. I guess the track keeps going through Rand Yard. Yeah. What was I going to say? Oh, yeah. So did you just take the auto train then? Were you just on it?
Yes. We spent 2 months in Florida from mid-January to mid-March.
Right.
And last Friday night and Saturday, we were on the auto train.
Have you been on it before?
Yeah, this is our 4th year of doing that.
How do you like it?
I like it.
Yeah?
It seems to work well.
And what does it cost to go from Sanford, Florida to Washington, D.C.?
Well, it depends on your accommodation level. If you want to...
Let's try it. Let's draw some scenarios. Let's say you were a guy that spent a couple of months sitting at Wendy's eating burgers and then went to CSX and said, well, if you just move the switch down the road there, it's going to... And they'll go, oh, okay. And you said, that's $2.5 million. Like, if you were that guy, how much would it cost you? I'm assuming you're not just, like, riding in the trunk of your car or laying in the back seat. You got a nice spot on the train.
That's correct. We typically reserve a bedroom, which has ample space for 2 adults and its own bathroom inside the room.
Right.
So
can you give us a ballpark figure? Like, I don't need to see your bank account. I don't need to see your financial records.
I think it's about $2,000
Okay.
round trip
Oh, round trip. Well, so that's not bad.
with your car,
Yeah.
something like that.
Exactly. And are they pretty careful with the cars when they put them on and stuff?
Oh yeah,
So
never had any problems.
So it's something you'd highly recommend then?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I've wanted to do that, but it's kind of like way out of my way because I got to head east all the way over to Washington.
Yeah. Well, it's about 8 hours from Boston to DC. So
Yeah, but it's kind of on your way.
yeah, it's kind of on my way.
Yeah, like how far off 95 is it on the north end?
At the Lorton end.
Yeah, the north end. That would be the north end. The
It's-
south end would be Sanford. The north end would be Lorton. Now that sounded
Right.
rude, Mike. That sounded rude, didn't it?
It did.
Um,
It's directly off 95.
Okay.
You could
I blame Robert for that
Okay. All right.
because I just want to be back on the show later.
Yeah.
Sorry, Robert. Sorry, buddy, but
It's okay.
I'm sorry if that sounded rude. I apologize, but I just
No, I stepped in that. That's okay.
yeah, I thought so. I thought you kind of still got some of it on your shoe. All right, no,
So-
it's just kind of interesting.
It's directly there. I mean, you could throw a football from the auto train terminal and
Okay.
hit I-95.
So it's pretty easy for you then. On the
Yeah.
north side of Boston, you jump on 95 and drive south to where you get off, and it's like pretty simple for you then.
Yeah, it's not bad.
It's kind of like a no-brainer almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a fun thing to. It would be kind of like a fun thing to do because it's not out of your way hardly at all.
True.
That wasn't a trick. That
that was awesome.
wasn't a trick. I'm just trying to like to think draw the pluses for it.
Yeah.
I've wanted to do it for years, but I can never talk myself into making that. Like I go down through Pittsburgh,
Yeah.
so I can never talk myself into making that trek all the way east. I figure by the time I get to the train terminal, I'll be almost
Yeah.
to Georgia.
Well, how far is it from Toronto to DC?
I don't know.
Maybe 10 hours?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
So I mean,
How many Dairy Queens are there?
yeah, exactly. Or
Not enough.
Or Steak and Shake.
Steak and Shake. Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
You can always go. You can't go wrong with a Steak and Shake. All right, so that's pretty cool. We pretty much covered your prototype career, your real railroad career, your engine. When did you retire from being an engineer?
I'm not retired. I'm still working.
Are you really?
Yeah.
Same firm as guys that, or have you done all right after the auto train thing? Was there anything else pretty cool you did, or is it cool every day, or is it still trains?
From there, I spent 2 years in Baltimore designing the double tracking of their light rail system. So when they built the original Baltimore light rail system, there were segments that they left as single track.
Okay.
And if they ran out of time, money, I don't know what the story was, but then 10, 15 years later, they decided, okay, this isn't working operationally, so we're going to double track the single track portions. So I spent 2 years working in Baltimore on that project.
Okay. So, do you mind if Mike and I talk to ourselves for a minute? And maybe you could just go stand over in the corner of the room with your back to us.
Oh, I'll go have some of that shrimp.
Yeah, exactly. So, Mike, I'm thinking, is this guy like one of the experts in the country for designing rail lines and stuff, commuter lines and stuff?
It sounds almost like he's right up there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
He's if he's not the guy, he's like
one of the guys.
He's one of the guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
he's like a front page guy.
Yeah, he's like a front page guy, and he seems very cautious about telling me any of this.
Well, I've known him for a while now, and I don't get very much of this out of him. So
okay, all right. So this is the problem then.
I've learned that it's better to just not ask.
Okay, so that's what the problem is. He's not used to people asking him these questions.
No.
All right, good. All right. we'll go. Okay, well, on the count of three, break. Okay, one,
All
two,
right.
three.
Break. Okay.
All right.
That's
So,
a lot better than what did when we had four of us doing it.
yeah. I don't think that really went much better. Okay, Robert, we're ready for you again.
Okay.
So after you designed the double
Track.
double track the commuter rail system for Baltimore, then what did you do? Like, this stuff is really. Do you know that this is really interesting to guys that are into trains?
I imagine it is.
Yeah. Trust me, it is. So how many engineers did you have working on the double track of the Baltimore commuter system?
We probably had about 8 to 10, maybe.
Okay. How many guys did you have when you came up with that brainwave of moving the switch down the line 3/4 of a mile? Was that like a room full of guys too?
Probably had 3 or 4, not that many.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay, after double tracking the Baltimore commuter line, then what happened?
Well, for the last 15 years, I've been doing consulting for the Federal Transit Administration.
So basically the federal transit is basically commuter rail, or?
Well, they fund transit projects, so they're the funding source for any type of transit project in the United States. It could be commuter rail, it could be light rail, it could be streetcars, buses, anything that involves transit.
Okay.
And so basically we do oversight for them, and we make sure that the federal investment is being spent appropriately.
All right.
In terms of the technology being used, and that the risk is low to the government for cost overruns and things like that.
Okay. So, in other words, for example, Albuquerque, New Mexico wants to put in a commuter rail system. Or how about this one? How about this? See if I'm picking this up or not. Sunrail in Florida wants to make a commuter line, and they need to put in sidings and what have you, and they get some federal money. You're involved with that.
I could be, yes.
Okay, so there's many
assigned to that.
Yeah, okay, so there's many guys that oversee teams that are assigned to all sorts of different transit things.
Oh yeah, there's probably about 20 consulting firms that do that.
Wow.
And they assign you to different locations, and you can't be conflicted by working for that agency. For example, if the firm was working for Sunrail, you couldn't do federal oversight for them.
Oh, if the firm was working for Sunrail designing the track.
Yeah. Yes, right.
You couldn't do federal oversight for them.
Correct.
Okay. So supposing a modeler's life gets hired to be on the spot reporting for Sunrail, and your firm was, and they found out you'd been on the show, would that be a conflict of interest?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
unless you're paying me to be on the show.
No. Did Mike tell you about you have to send in a check for $200?
Oh, jeez.
I thought it was
No, you didn't.
205. I thought it was 205.
Yeah. Well, he's a friend of yours, so we cut him a break.
The Mike discount.
Yeah, the Mike discount. Yeah. Yeah, the Mike discount is less than 0.5%. All right, so now you're an S-scale, and I've been looking at some of your photos online on your Facebook page, and also you're an artist.
Yeah.
So how did you end up in Boston?
Well, as I said, I came here in '93 to manage that Old Colony Railroad project, and have been here ever since.
Okay, so the firm, is it still the same firm as of '93? Or
I don't work for the same firm, but the firm is still in Boston.
Okay, all right. So you had trouble holding the job then, eh?
Oh yeah. Yes. No.
Can you understand why?
Yeah.
I mean, honestly.
So when did you discover, and also, so if people go to a site called My Depot, let me see what it's called. Hang on.
Okay.
I can handle it. If they go to olddepotgallery.com, old, O-L-D, depot, and gallery.com, olddepotgallery.com. If they go there, they'll see all kinds of railroad art. So when did you start doing the railroad art?
Probably around 2000.
Oh, not till then.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and how did that start?
Well, about that time, well, I've always drawn things, sketched things, made artistic drawings, but never really did anything in color. And so then I discovered this set of pastels and started fooling around with making colored drawings.
Okay.
And was doing landscapes and things like that. And then I decided, well, I think I'll do some railroad theme paintings. Basically, it's a landscape with a train in it, and so I started developing some paintings based on either scenes I've seen or photographs that I've taken, and that's kind of how it started.
Okay.
I was also, as I was telling you, working in Baltimore, only I didn't move to Baltimore. I would spend my weekdays in Baltimore and travel home on the weekends. So,
okay, right.
So being alone in a hotel room at night, what else would I do? I just bring some art supplies with me and work on paintings.
And did you fly to Baltimore or did you take the train down there?
No, I'd fly to Baltimore every Monday morning and fly back Southwest Airlines every Friday evening.
Okay. You were a regular on flight, like me going back and forth to Florida.
Yeah.
So when you say pastels, I'm begging you, whatever I ask you next, I'm begging you to say no.
It's okay.
Are they pan pastels?
No. They're not.
We just have a very, what would the word be, Mike? A very difficult history with pan pastels?
I have no issue with them whatsoever.
We have a very checkered history here at the Modeler's Life with pan pastels.
Yeah, I would say it's a very up and down, love-hate.
Yeah. We have a love-hate relationship with pan pastels here at the Old Modeler's Life Network, the old AML network. I really like this one from of the RS3, the main RS3. That's my favorite one so far. I'm kind of partial to that one. How many of these paintings have you done?
Probably about 40, maybe.
Are they called paintings when you do it in pastel?
I call it a painting.
Okay.
It's, pastel is essentially the same pigment that's in paint, only it's compressed into a solid stick or crayon, whatever you want to call it, using a bentonite or clay binder. And, it's paint, but it's not liquid.
Okay. Oddly enough, I think he played for the Cleveland Indians in the late 40s as a shortstop. I think he was a Gold Glove 2 seasons in a row. Clay binder.
Clay binder.
That's very cool. So did it? How long would it say that like this RS3 of the main RS3? How long would that take you to do it? It's 12 by 18.
12 by 18 is probably about 40 hours, maybe.
Okay, and it's just like another hobby altogether, as well as model.
Absolutely.
But it's train related. So okay, I'm going to ask you another question. One of my favorite things about Mike, having Mike on as regularly on the old AML network, is that he's a railroader in real life, but he likes to mingle with us modelers and hobbyists. And so you've been involved with trains pretty much your whole adult life, and yet you do the paintings and you do the model railroading. So is it just something that gets in your blood, and you really don't care whether it's your livelihood or your hobby?
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely in the blood. It's I don't know how to describe it. It's that same thing where, an ordinary person would cross a set of tracks at a grade crossing and think nothing of it, but someone like you and I and Mike, we'd look both ways and see if a train's coming. So
Yeah.
it's definitely ingrained.
It's something to do with the machine, because I worked on a farm as a kid and I loved my years of working on the machine. It's something to do with the machine. It's something to do with the tracks disappear off into the distance. It's something to do with the tracks. Mike once said not that long ago to me, but on another show, he's saying, the amount of area that's actually the train is actually touching, the locomotive's actually touching on the rail is so small compared to the mass of the machine.
That's right.
It's all kind of romantic somehow.
Yeah.
And fascinating.
Scary.
Yeah.
And very scary. That's
Scary,
what makes Robert's regular job so important. Is because if he makes a calculated mistake,
well, yeah,
it's it could be disastrous. I mean, these guys that design the tracks, whether it be Robert or anybody else that does it, these guys they've got a very important job with the infrastructure across this country, and it's it's one of those behind the scenes guys that you never think about.
Exactly.
The stuff just didn't pop up. That's for sure.
Yeah, they don't just put it down and then stick a couple of shims under the ties on the left hand side.
Yeah,
I've seen that.
No, that's
I've seen that
not
done.
I think Mike.
Yes.
Robert, can you go in the corner again and face the wall just for a minute?
Okay.
Yeah. Mike, I think he's starting to get used to me now.
I hope so. It's been over an hour.
Yeah, well, yeah, it can take people a lot longer than that, but I think he's starting to get used to me now.
That's okay.
That's all right.
That's good. That's a good thing.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think I sense that he's starting to become relaxed, and I actually am just his dim-witted brother. I'm not some sort of Russian spy trying to get information. All right, Robert, come on back.
Okay.
So the painting, so you just started doing that about just around 20 years ago.
Yes, about that time.
And okay, so I guess being an engineer, you have did you already know you could draw this well, or?
It took some time. Some of my earlier stuff doesn't look as good as some of my more recent stuff, but it's a process just like anything else.
Sure. And when did you start going to Springfield and selling it there?
My first year in Springfield, I think, was 2013.
All right.
And but I've been going to Springfield as a hobbyist,
Sure.
a patron for many, many years, probably for 25 years.
Right.
But it's a great show, and I do really well at the show. People like my work, and I sell lots of prints and originals.
And because you had a fairly big booth there.
Yeah.
And so when did you actually start selling? So did you sell, like the first year you were there, you were pretty excited about how well you did selling, or?
Yes, definitely. I did really well my first year, and subsequently every year I do well there. But I started selling things commercially about 2006, and I went to a lot of train shows, smaller shows around the country, upstate New York, and sometimes barely break even or hardly make it worth my while. But I was persistent, and after a while, I had sort of a following where people would buy my calendars every year, for example, or come back and buy additional prints as I created new work. And
well, while I was there, when I was there at the booth with you at Springfield, a fella came along and he was like, "I buy one every year. I buy a couple every year." And he was so excited to be buying one. I don't remember who he was in particular, but I remember how excited he was about buying your art and stuff like that. And I think it helped that I was there. I think.
I think so.
Yeah.
No, he's a good guy. His name's Bill Lowry, and he's a great model railroader and lives in the Boston area. And he's been a good customer of mine and a good friend as well. So
I guess Mike must own quite a few of these, eh?
Here we go.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I step on a sore spot there?
No, there's not a sore spot with me.
Oh, okay.
So Mike, after
Yes.
after the show, go to my website, download the order form.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we actually talked about it. I have a Springfield interview coming up with which you will have heard by the time you hear this interview. So we don't need to get into that. We will have covered that in depth.
Yeah.
So do
Yeah.
you mind if I feel, you know what the problem is, Robert? Is it Bob or is it Robert?
Whatever you like.
Can I call you Steve?
No.
Okay. See, so it's
You
not
call
what
me-
it's not
call
whatever
me
I
Bob.
it's not whatever I like. It's whatever you
Robert
like.
works.
All right. Would you prefer Bob or Robert? What do the
prefer-
guys at the office call you?
I prefer Bob.
Okay. Bob.
Yes.
Nice handle,
when
Bob.
when I was young, the only person that called me Robert was my mother when she was upset with me. So.
Okay. Well, I've been pretty much upset since we started, so I've only now just got to the point where I'm relaxed. So here's the problem. I feel, and I actually said this to Mike a few days ago. Did I back me up on this, Mike? So if I didn't say this to you, then deny it. But if I did, please back me up on this. Here's basically what I said to Mike. I feel like Bob is of a higher social value than myself. So I'm quite concerned about getting my points across to Bob, because it's like these are guys that are like, they're talking to me and they're like, they want to have fun, but they're thinking, this guy's could be trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. That pretty much nails it.
Yeah. He's one of those guys that goes, well, he does ride a Harley quite a bit. All right. So this next question, the reason I'm what's the word?
Preoccupied?
No,
Preoccupied?
I am always preoccupied with something else. The reason what's the word when you, the preamble to this question is, so tell me if you'd like or not like, but it says the original for the Boston and Maine one is sold. So do you feel comfortable telling us what the original would have sold for?
Sure. I believe that sold for $1,200.
Wow. So that must be very gratifying that somebody would pay $1,200 for one of your pieces of art.
Yes. But it is an original, and like I said, there's about 40 hours worth of work in it, so not including the materials and...
Yeah, no, I guess the reason I ask is not long ago, Mike and I interviewed a fella from Edmonton, Alberta, Rob Arsenault, who has a very successful company weathering model railroad locomotives. And he's an exquisite aviation artist, isn't he, Mike?
Oh yeah, I was pretty blown away by it.
Yeah, same quality as your stuff, Robert. And
really?
He was more excited about how successful his weathering business was. Like the problem with being like, I understand, like $1,200, it must be gratifying. The only reason I say that is because people have a hard time understanding how much work goes into a piece of art.
That's correct. And and it depends, so I'll ask, some people will always ask me at shows, well, how much the originals go for? I don't have them priced out there, but I will mention that, and sometimes you'll get a feeling like that's a shocking amount of money to some folks, and some folks will say, wow, that's not bad.
Right.
So it depends on the audience, I guess.
Yeah, and then you have copies. What are they called? What's a copy of a pastel piece of art? What is that?
My prints, which are
they lithographs?
They're G clays.
I knew that.
Which is an archival print, so it won't fade, or hopefully will last a very long time.
Okay.
And they are about the same size as the originals. They're 13 by 19, and they sell for $45.
And how many of those does Mike have?
Oh gosh,
I got
Mike!
70. I have 75 or 80 of them. I have like 3 of every one.
All right.
Yeah.
So let's get to the part where you guys stumbled onto each other on the S scale because you started doing 3D printing, Robert. Is that what it was?
That's correct. Yeah. In S scale, as you can imagine, you have to do a lot of scratch building. And there was a particular locomotive that I wanted that wasn't available in S, and nothing close to it was on the market to kit bash or cobble something up even close to it. So I started scratch building this locomotive. It was a Alco C420, S scale, and Mike and I talk about this all the time, has a real void in the area of second generation locomotives. There's just nothing there. There's a U25B and a GP35 you can get commercially, but that's about it. So basically anything built after 1965 is not available in S.
Okay.
So I found some plans in an old issue of Model Railroader for the Alco C420, and I started scratch building this out of styrene, and then got into it and thought, wow, the curves are just impossible. The roof is curved, and there's compound curves with the nose and the top of the cab hood, and trying to get all that to work in styrene was a real challenge. And so then I was reading this article in Model Railroad Hobbyist, Joe Fugate's magazine.
Yes.
And it was by a guy named Jack Burgess. And he was talking about using online software called SketchUp, which is available for download for free, and then designing it and having it commercially, or designing 3D parts and having them printed commercially by Shapeways.
Right.
And so I've never designed anything in 3D before. I have no CAD background, though I'm an engineer and understand how things work in 3 dimensions. But I downloaded the software and started drawing pieces, and started drawing the back rear section of this locomotive. And it came together, and it was a little trial and error. I sent out for some test prints, and after a couple times I got some working parts out of it, and then started developing the whole rest of the locomotive piece by piece.
Okay, and do you know what CAD stands for?
Computer aided design.
That's right, exactly. Lex Parker taught me that. So then you were looking for some measurements, and you and Mike hooked up, and now you guys are printing locomotives.
Right. Yeah.
Well, there was a little more to it than that.
There's a little more to it.
Yeah.
If I may interject.
Have you been listening? Have you been listening to the interview at all, Mike? It's like, so then you got your pencil, Robert, and what happened after you got your pencil? Well, I started to draw. Well, like, what did you draw? Like, was it in vertical lines or horizontal lines, or like, how did that drawing? Were you pressing heavily or were you pressing lightly?
Here's a little bit more insight into what happened. We started talking, and I looked at one of the drawings that he sent me over a screenshot of. I believe it was the locomotive cab. If it wasn't it, Bob? It was like the locomotive cab or something. And I first words out of my mouth is, "Hey, that looks cool. The latches are wrong." And he's like, "What?" I said, "The latches are wrong." I said, "Don't do anything with that. I'll talk to you tomorrow at work when I get to work." And it's 90 some degrees outside, and I go up on the engine, and I'm like measuring these latches because we had a pretty slow day, and it was a GP38-2.
Right.
So I'm sitting measuring the latches, and I give him the measurements, and I draw it out, and I give him how far away I give him the measurement of the box, and he goes, "Well, holy cow, that's not right at all. Here, let me make a change to this." And then a while later, he sends that back. He says, "Well, hey, I need this part measured. You happen to have access to that?" I said, "Oh yeah, I'll be right back."
Right.
And we just kind of kept on going from there. And I mean, the radiator grill is a personal accomplishment of mine that I'm very proud of. Because I measured each square, like each one end, the very, very end,
Right.
like two sections, and two little square sections. And I measured that, and then I multiplied it by this much length, et cetera, et cetera. And I told him, okay, these are the measurements. It's this long by this high, and here's where the bolt holes go. Here's where this goes. Here's where this goes. I send them this on just a copy of a piece of paper. I have a piece of paper, and I just, took a snapshot out of it, sent it to him, and he says, "Oh, okay." Well, about a day later, he says, "Hey, how's this look?" Next thing you know, I got the part sitting there on my computer, and I'm sitting there going, "Well, so far that looks pretty doggone good. What do you need to know? Is this, And it got to be. It got to be almost like an R&D or an R&D type of relationship at first, where it was he would throw the idea out, and I'd say, "Yeah, I can measure that." "Well, here, is this what you're looking for?" "Yeah, well, how?" And then we just bounce it back and forth until we got to a conclusion that we were both satisfied with.
Right.
He'd do a test print, and then rest is history. And this stuff is, and now what is there about 25 different parts we have now?
Oh gosh, more than that.
More than that.
More like 70.
Yeah, one of the things that he and I were talking about one day were the fuel tanks. Remember that?
Yeah.
And we were trying to figure out, like, EMD, the second generation fuel tanks are all the same profile. For the 90% of them have the same basic profile.
Right.
And we were trying to figure out how to come up with all these different sizes. And I just told him, I said, let's just do the ends. You can build the rest of it from styrene.
Yep.
And
styrene
he says,
wrapper.
Yep, styrene and wrapper. And all the next thing you know, hey, that's a doggone good idea. Next thing you know, we have EMD fuel tank ends and S scale. I mean, it's been a very, very cool relationship, because and not only that, but he started to teach me how to do some of this,
right?
Which has been immensely. This is too big of a word.
Yeah,
for me, that's a big word.
Yeah, it is.
Really, really helpful.
Yeah, there you go.
Because now I can go and take a look at something and say, I want to start to design this, and I'll send my drawings to him, and he'll give me the suggestions as to, here, try this. Okay, this is the problem. Here's the issue. Don't forget, when you want to do it this way, do it this way. Don't do it this way, because this won't line up then. And he's been an excellent teacher for me too.
Right.
So it's been fun. It's just fun. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong there, Bob, but I think we kind of have a few S-scale people a little worried.
Wow.
At least one or two others.
At least one or two others are.
I'm worried any time you have a sharp object in your hand. So.
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. So am I.
Well, here's the deal, Bob. One time I was in Manitowoc, and I saw Mike operating one of the locomotives, and I was with another fellow of mine, and the train was coming towards us, and I saw Mike was the locomotive engineer, and I said to my buddy, I says, "You know what? Why don't we just step back a little bit?" He said, "How far?" And I said, "Keep going." So okay, yes. So okay, so you guys are really into the 3D printing then.
Yeah.
And so what locomotives have you got? You got what locomotives are designed that? What is the name of your three? Because don't you have like don't people that are on Shapeways have like some sort of Shapeways business?
Yes, Mike has his own shop, and I have my own shop. Mine is Century Models on Shapeways.
So how hard are they? Every time somebody tells me that, I can never find them. So what's the easiest way to find Century Models on Shapeways? Let's do this. Let's do this together.
Okay.
So if I go to Google and put in Century Model Shapeways, would it show up?
I usually go to Shapeways and then search types in Century Models in their search
All right.
page.
Okay, I'm
Or
going to do
search
that.
bar.
I'm going to go to Shapeways because I'm not. Do you know a fellow named Ralph Renzetti?
Only from the podcast.
Yeah, he does an excellent clinic in 3D printing. There's dead silence there, Mike.
Yeah.
Century Models. Okay, I'm at Shapeways. I'm now putting in Century Models, and I'm hitting Enter. Let's see what comes up. See, it never. Oh, maybe it does. A lava cap for a 70th century. Gasoline pump for mid. See, it never ever works for me, ever.
So I think you have to look. Shoot.
You go under all products. You go to shops.
Go to shops.
And then and then when you click on the search thing, should be the top left one right there.
All products. Do I go to shops? Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah, hit shops and then search and then
all right.
go down from there.
So you have to put in shops, and then go to Century Models. All right.
Oh man, I got to order some of them.
All right. So now I see
care.
Century Models, and then I click on Century Models, and there's a picture of one of your paintings, number 607. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So now there's okay. So now is there what's here? Can somebody build a C420 from your parts?
Mostly. At least the hard parts are all there. For example, the short hood and the cab and the long hood.
Right.
You still have to do some scratch building on the frame.
Yeah, like I see on your Facebook page, there's a frame there made out of styrene.
Yep.
And so that's you have to build a. Do you have any? Is there any place anybody can get some instructions about how to do that? Because that seems like a pretty ominous task to me for somebody that's, to build a frame out of styrene for an S-gauge S-scale locomotive.
Right now, I'm currently working on an article for S Resource magazine on how to build the EMD locomotive, starting with the frame and through the whole process using the parts from Shapeways.
Okay, so
there will be an article
on building the
GP38-2.
All right, but so on the C4. So how many locomotives have you guys got on Shapeways then? Like 2 of them, or?
Well, there's parts for the C420. There's more parts for the GP38-2, and there's a long hood for the GP39-2, which is essentially everything that's on the 38-2, only the long hood being different. So you can make a 39-2 or 38-2 with the parts on Shapeways.
And how often do you sell parts on here?
Not that often.
No?
But, it's not like there's a lot of advertising going on either.
Right.
So once the article hits, probably some folks will want to build it, and it'll generate some sales.
Okay, so you don't think you're going to generate any sales from this interview then? Okay, well, I know where you stand then.
Oh, wait, a sale just came up.
Yeah.
Oh, Mike, that's you.
Too
Yeah,
late.
that's me.
Too late. Yeah, see? Did you just buy something?
No.
Oh, okay.
But I did. But looking at this, I did remind myself that I do need to get something taken care of.
All right. So basically, then you've designed these parts for yourself, and then if you happen to sell any, that's just a bonus.
Right.
Is that
as a matter of fact, the markup is so low on these that really all we're trying to do is encourage people to use the parts to build things. We're not trying to make any money.
Right. Exactly. Okay. Yeah. So this is mostly people are using Shapeways and 3D printing in order to make something that they want themselves that they can't get any other way. And if they happen to sell a couple, most guys are like you. There's a small markup, but mostly they just wanted the part for themselves.
Exactly.
And so, all right. So,
I was going to say, Lionel, it's like if you look down here, you see the EMD air tank ends. We just designed the ends because you can buy you can buy styrene tube, and I forget what we use, Robert. Is it the 5/16 tube? No, it's not that big.
It's quarter inch, maybe
Quarter inch, something along those
quarter
lines.
inch, yeah.
And it just pops right into the
Right.
hole in the tube, and you can cut that tank or that air tank to whatever length you need. So to save money, for $4.50 you can get the ends,
Right.
and then make whatever you need.
Okay.
It's the same kind of concept as like the fuel tank ends. For $8 you get the two ends, and then you just use your own styrene to
Right. And in this
make whatever size you need.
In this particular case, somebody else has designed it and everything. So can I ask you roughly the EMD-2 cab with the 81-inch nose is $48.86. So did you, for your original one, was it somewhere around $40 it cost you? Is that roughly, does that sound right? Or is that like I guess I'm trying to imagine in my head, if you design something and send it to Shapeways, they charge you something that you can consider to be a reasonable cost to carry on with the project.
Basically, you decide what the markup is.
But
if you want zero markup, then it's the same cost as if I was printing it for myself.
Right. So
I'm trying to think of what that. I think my cost on the EMD-2 cab is about $44.86, $4 less.
Okay, so, yeah. So okay, I guess my question was,
it's not a lot of money.
No, and it's worth your while. People that are doing this 3D printing, it's not outrageous if they want to build an S scale, an EMD, a Jeep 39. It's not out of line because the parts aren't unbelievably expensive.
Right.
And you hear people talk about the different levels of the printing, like the quality of the printing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hear unhappiness.
Yeah. Well, Bob and I talk about that all the time. Is I might order a part and he might order the same part, and Shapeways has now gone to, and I haven't done it yet, but I believe they've gone out to where you can orient the piece. Like you can tell them how you want the piece printed on the table. I'm not sure if that's gotten active or not yet. I haven't looked recently, but there's print lines on it. You can tell the printing process because it's not. It's just like any other printer. It starts and it's
right. And printing and this 3D stuff is in its infancy, right? Pretty much.
It is. Right, and it'll only get better.
Yeah.
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 So it's well worth the trouble to be doing it, though, to produce S-scale locomotives.
Absolutely.
There's nothing there to get.
Yeah. I mean, it's not injection molded smooth quality. There are some lines in it, but by and large, if you prime it and sand it, those lines can disappear.
Right. It's well worth the trouble, Ben, if you want to build an S-scale locomotive or something that's a very unique in HO or O scale or something like that. It's part of the hobby. It's like, it's another facet of the hobby. Another reason why I think the hobby's just going to grow like crazy. There's just too many cool things you can do.
Yeah.
Like, it's like for me with the podcast. And I mean, I just love talking to all the people. It's endlessly fascinating. It's fascinating, Bob, to talk to you about your career designing, railroads and commuter lines and being part of that. Like, it's endlessly fascinating. The hobby for me has grown exponentially in the last 3 years doing this podcast. And 3D printing is the same. It gives you the opportunity to let other modelers get the stuff, and there's satisfaction involved, and it's endless. I mean, that's what the hobby's all about, is producing satisfaction for yourself.
True. I mean, 3D printing's it's like a tool. It's like anything else. It's like your X-Acto knife or your table saw. It's a way to get something. The real benefit of 3D printing is once you have the design, it's easy to make multiple copies. If you scratch build a locomotive, you'd go through this process of cutting styrene or whatever and by the time you're done, you'd say, "Oh, geez, I don't know if I'll ever want to build another one," because it's so difficult and arduous to start from scratch again every time. But with the 3D printing, you can just build another one using the same parts that you originally created.
Right. Okay. And go ahead.
I've got a question for him.
I'm sorry, we're out of time.
Okay, sorry. Now, have you, with the use of the 3D printing, do you find that you're looking at your layout in a different manner than you did before you decided to get into it? And what I mean by that is, do you feel as if there is no impossible hurdle now that can't be solved, whereas before prior to getting into the 3D printing, you might look at something and say, wow, I just got no idea how I'm going to do this, and now it's that you have the 3D printing capable and are able to do it. Do you look at something and say, I can just design this to do this and that should work? And do you find that it makes your modeling and the way you look at modeling easier?
I would say so, definitely, because there's so many things on a layout that could benefit by that resource. Whether it's for example, I built a interlocking tower on my layout, and it's been sitting there unfinished because I can't figure out how to build stairs to go up the outside of the structure. So now, using 3D printing, I could generate stairs,
right,
with the hand railing and everything. So it's problem solving, and I think it helps in that regard.
Yeah, it just the limits of the hobby now have expanded again.
Absolutely.
Well, and especially with S, HO scale's pretty much got almost everything it needs. I mean, it's pretty much got everything.
There's a lot of guys using 3D printing though in HO as well to get obscure things that they want. I think it.
Oh, absolutely.
I think it broadens the hobby for everybody. Now we've done a whole. So just quickly, well, you know what? We've basically run out of time, and we didn't even talk about your layout.
Wow, that could be a whole other podcast.
Exactly. We'll wait till you hear this one to decide if you want to plunge in again.
Yeah, right.
But you know what I would like if I had one thing of all the stuff I've looked at that you have online, and this is something that I know will annoy you, but I'm going to do it anyways because it's something that I want. Because when people are telling you about see if I'm right about this. See if this fits. I love doing the podcast. Like, the part I love about the podcast the most is talking to the people. That is, without a doubt, the most fun. The second most fun thing is editing the podcast and getting them out there for the people to listen to. And then it kind of goes down from there. So I like having a website. I like having a decent website. But it's not what I would call one of my fun things to do. I do it because, I know people want to be able to figure out what's going on, and it's a good way to give out information about the podcast and all that. And so, would that be the same for you? Like, you do your website for your art, but it wouldn't be like your number one thing to do. It's something that you do to assist in people having knowledge about your art.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not a web designer or enjoy even editing it and adding new things to it.
Right. Yeah.
It's a necessary thing.
Yeah, exactly. You don't hate it, but you'd prefer if it somehow magically it just did it itself.
Right.
All right. So then this will annoy you because this is the kind of thing that people occasionally will do for me too. Is when I'm looking at your pictures on your art website.
Yep.
I wish I could click on them and see them bigger. You'd click on the picture and it would open up into a bigger size on the screen.
So basically, you're saying you want to step into into the photograph. Is what you're wanting to do.
Well, that's a double-edged sword, because in order to do that, then I have to provide a higher resolution image. And
Okay.
if the resolution is too good, then someone could just print it themselves.
You know what? As soon as I said that, that's exactly what I thought of.
Yeah.
That was that's why I kept the resolution on all the pictures that Mike is in. I keep them all really low because I don't want people printing them off and making copies and putting them on their wall. But as soon as I said that, I thought that's probably a bad idea. Excellent. All right. Okay.
I don't know. I would pay for that picture of Mike holding the flowers that looks like a tree is growing out of the flowers in front of the Dairy
I know
Queen.
that was sweet, wasn't it? That pretty much that and the one. Have you seen the one where he's standing in the field with the cows on the crew
No.
page? You got to go look on the crew page.
I will look at that.
That's like my favorite. It's one of my favorite pictures of all.
I got out of my tree stand, Robert. I got out of the tree stand and as I was getting ready, all the cows were coming back out from being milked, and I saw a bunch of them were sitting there coming over by the fence. I'm like, "Come on, guys, let's go. Let's have a picture." And there was like, they all come over by me, and I took a selfie with the cows.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a perfect picture.
It's awesome.
I think it describes. There are so many ways to describe the podcast. That's one of the ways. It's perfect. All right. So you have an S-scale layout that you're building,
Yes, I do.
but we're going to talk about that another day. Because you know what we're going to do next after the end of this podcast? We're going to keep you for a little while, and we're going to do something called the Kelly questions.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that's what we're going to do next. So, Mr. Frascella, that was is it Frascella?
Frascella, yes.
All right, there you go. I don't think I would have got that without Mike's help, which I really don't like to claim. So this is pretty cool. Like, we're going to have to talk to you again because we've got to talk to you about your layout and everything else. But talking to you about all the work you did with the railroad, that was pretty cool. And next time you won't be as afraid.
I'll try not to be as guarded.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you were guarded. You were just like concerned, like about this guy. You were like, why is he asking me all? It's the same. It's the same problem I have. Like, there's a fella right now I want to interview, Phil Monet, and he's like, "Why do you want to talk to me?" And I'm like, "Because you're going to be interesting." Well, how do you know? Trust me. Everybody tells me his layout is fantastic, so I'm like, trust me, you're going to be interesting. And he's a lighting director on Broadway. And it's like, of course you're going to be interesting. And that's the problem is the best part about this podcast is that everybody is interesting. When I was on this show called the Podcast Review, they were asking me where I came up with the idea. And where I came up with the idea for this podcast was like 25 or 30 years ago on the CBS morning show. There was this bit they had where they would blindfold the guy and he'd walk with a pin towards a map of the United States. And wherever the pin landed, they'd spin him around 3 times, and then they'd walk him towards the pin. This was on the CBS morning show. And they'd walk him towards the map with the pin. And he'd stick the pin in the map. And that's where he would go. And then when he would get there, say he ended up in Split Lip, Wyoming. When he got to Split Lip, Wyoming, he would go to a phone booth, open a phone book, and riffle the pages and stick his finger in. And wherever his finger landed, that was the person he talked to.
Oh, my goodness.
And everybody had a story. Everybody has an interesting story. If you're willing to ask them questions and find out about their life, everybody has an interesting story. You know, you were the first person. You were the first person we've talked to that didn't. But that was what's the chances of that? Man, I went a long ways back for that one, didn't I? I chased that one all the way to the warning track. All right. So, thank you very much, Robert. This is cool. Bob, Steve.
It was a whole lot of fun.
It was. Mike, can you give out our email address?
I can. If you'd like to get a hold of us through the electronic medium of email, you can contact us at Modeler's Life. That's Modeler's Life with 1 L like pastel and not 2 L's like gallery at gmail.com.
Oh, that was sweet. That's one of the best ever. That was sweet. I'm looking at our website because I was looking at the crew page, and at the top we got the ad for Jim Lincoln Chevrolets, and this guy on this podcast review show is looking at our website, and he's going, "How much are you getting paid by Jim Lincoln Chevrolets for this ad?" And I said, "Well, it doesn't really exist." He said, "This is prime real estate. Why would you have a fake?" I said, "Well, it's a joke. It's part of the bit."
It's right across from the Dairy Queen.
Exactly. It's just down the street from Fuller Field. He said, "Why would you do that?" I'm like, "Why wouldn't you?"
Why not?
Yeah, why not?
Exactly. Okay, so we have a website, amodeler'slife.com. You go there and you can see links to our latest episodes, and there's a link to our Patreon page. If you'd like to hear more of us, all you got to do is pony up $5 a month, and there's all kinds of other stuff you can listen to. And then there's a link to our Facebook page, and I think that's pretty much it.
Twitter.
Yeah, we have Twitter that I'm working on, that I do occasionally. And okay, I think that's pretty much it. So now, Bob, there's something you have to say at the end of the show, and it's very important that you do it with enthusiasm.
I will try my best.
Do you know what that is? Have you listened to the show at all?
Something about closing the barn doors and the sun setting, and
Your job is to say happy rails to you.
that's right.
Yeah. All right, okay.
I can do that
All right. Let me know when you're
at the
ready.
appropriate time.
Yeah, let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready.
Okay. Well, Bob, as we close the barn doors on another episode of A Modeler's Life, and the sun slowly sets over the back 40, I guess there's nothing else left to do except for you to say,
Happy rails to you.